forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
Greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Deace alongside my co-host Aaron McIntire. Good to see you again, brother. How are you?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
Hanging in there as the fight to restore sanity in the Big Ten Conference continues. And that's where we are going to begin with our Big Five on Bigger Ten this week. And let's start with issue number one, is we are now seeing experts are coming out and they are calling BS on the Big Ten. So here's Venk Murthy, not an insignificant figure. He just so happens to have Twitter following in the thousands as one of the leading cardiologists at the University of Michigan. What conference, Aaron, would that be in?
I think one of those piddling little Mac conferences, right?
Indeed. And he is retweeting and agreeing here with Professor Daryl Francis. He's from an interesting school called Imperial College, which is where we got the first of many wrong model simulations.
Just a coincidence.
Yes, just a bit outside. Yeah. And Daryl Francis says, hey, I don't even know what a Big Ten is, but this JAMA study on myocarditis is hot garbage and should be retracted. Venk Murthy at the University of Michigan agrees. Not pictured here is a man named Michael Ackerman. He's the head of genetic cardiology at a little place called the Mayo Clinic. You may have heard of them. They're kind of a rinky-dink outfit. You go there, when nobody else will take your hard case. No, they actually might be the most prestigious hospital in the United States of America for the general population. And what state are they in, by the way? Refresh my memory. Where would Michael Ackerman goes to work every day at Mayo, and what state would that be?
That's Montana.
Montana, yes. Is Montana? No, it's another M state.
Oh, no, yeah.
Minnesota. Would Minnesota be in the Big Ten Conference? Last I checked. So we have something here that has kind of gone nuclear since the Big Ten's announcement, Aaron, and that is the other three leagues are in search of data that shows it's safe to play. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, all kinds of such data is popping up. They are calling BS on the Big Ten. The Big Ten remains silent. We don't even know that it is this myocarditis issue. They basically leaked it to Nicole Auerbach at The Athletic, saying that they had, 10 to 15 cases of this that had propped up in the league just since they started the modified or the scaled back workouts. Mm-hmm. Here's why I think that's BS. Number one, if it was myocarditis, they think they would have just told us that. But then number two, if they really do have that many cases going on already, and for those that don't know, myocarditis is a heart inflammation that happens with viral outbreaks. It's actually associated with a wide array of viral outbreaks, including far more common ones than the novel coronavirus. The study in the Journal of the American Medical Association that was cited, the average age of the person that they noticed had heightened myocarditis concerns was 49 years old. Aaron, would that be the average age of the American college football player by any chance?
Not unless you're getting away with stacks of lies.
Yes. So I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. The SEC's actually been testing for myocarditis with its athletes for the last 5 months because it's often associated, it's very common with viral outbreaks. And the other reason why I think that if it was 10 to 15 cases of this, I don't think that's what it is. If they had 10 to 15 cases of this, Aaron, in even the walkthrough OTA workouts that they were having, why are they still permitting those workouts to go? Many schools have continued their practice. I mean, Michigan has practiced every day for the last week. I know that for a fact. So if myocarditis was already showing up in several student athletes with even the modified scaled back workouts, why did they allow those modified scale back workouts to continue?
Here's an even better question for you, Steve. Why does Kevin Warren care more about Big Ten players than he does his own son?
Indeed, because his son has been practicing at Mississippi State in the SEC all week long. And SEC teams opened camp on Monday. His son, Kevin Warren, the commissioner of the Big Ten, his son has been practicing at Mississippi State all week long. So there you go. I want to walk our audience through this thread.
And I just want to tell you, I've got just the graphics in the thread, but it's still more than enough for what you need, I think.
Okay. This is the epidemiological curve of every state in our footprint as things stand right now. Now, as we go through these states, this is Michigan, which today announced they're going to reopen the casinos. So hundreds of people, many of them, if you're talking about a casino, are going to be elderly, are going to be able to go inside a casino, breathe recycled air, and in a place where they're a high-risk age group, and they're touching everything. But 22 guys who all test negative that are in the lowest risk age group can't play football outdoors in Michigan. But what you're going to see as we go through these states, you have Michigan, which had a very strict lockdown, has a mask mandate throughout the state. You can see its death curve flattened. We go next to Ohio, which also had a very strict lockdown for a while, but also has mask mandates. You can see that its death curve flattened. A state of 18 million people. Can you go back to Ohio for just a moment? A state of 18 million people has not reached 50 deaths in a given day since June 4th.
Can I interject something as well?
You
for
bet.
those of you or for those of you watching on YouTube, make sure you pay attention to the number on the left side of the screen.
Yes, because you're going to see with different populations, those numbers are bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, 50 deaths in a state of 18 million like Ohio is not a big deal. 50 deaths in a state of 3 million like Iowa would be a much bigger deal, right?
Exactly.
So it's very important to pay attention to the numbers on the left hand of the screen. So you see Ohio, which had a strict lockdown for a while, has a mask mandate. You can see they have crushed their death curve in Ohio. We go next. The next state we're going to take a look at is Pennsylvania. Had one of the strictest lockdowns, one of the strictest mask mandates. Its governor, Tom Wolf, has been one of the chief Karens amongst the governors here in our Big Ten footprint. And look at their state. Look at where their death curve has been now since the 1st of June, really since Memorial Day weekend. I believe this is the most populous state in our footprint, I believe. And they have not been over 100 deaths in Pennsylvania since Memorial Day weekend, but still not safe for Penn State to play football, I guess. How about Illinois? If Pennsylvania didn't have the strictest lockdown in the Big Ten footprint, Illinois did. State of about 12.5 million people. And you can see they have not been above 50 deaths since June the 23rd. Their death curve crushed in July, well into August. We go next to New Jersey, most densely populated state in America. If it was its own country, it would be, I think, the 6th worst hit country in the world for coronavirus. And yet, look where their curve has been for a couple of months now. All but flattened. Can't play football, though, at Rutgers. How about Maryland? They're the 5th most densely populated state in the United States. And look how low their numbers are. Terps can't play football there. Indiana, which has been one of the first states to reopen, they started reopening on May the 1st. They have not been above 50 deaths in the state of Indiana since June the 4th. In fact, they haven't even been close to it since June the 4th. Hoosiers and Boilermakers can't play. You have Minnesota, which I think has, from what I read, the strictest mask mandate in our state, in our footprint. And you can see, except for one brief one-day spike last week in August, they have been nowhere near 20 deaths in a state of over 6 million since the middle of June. How about Iowa, where we never had a lockdown? We have no mask mandates. We've not had a single minor die of coronavirus in a state of 3.5 million. And you can see we have only been over double digits in deaths in Iowa 7 times in the last 75 days. We also have one of the oldest populations in the country, one of the largest per capita morbid obesity populations. We have a huge amount of meatpacking plants. If you know anything about this virus, that's been where some of the worst outbreaks have been. And yet still, despite those factors, we have only been in double digits in a given day for deaths of coronavirus or with coronavirus 7 times in the last 75 days in Iowa. Nebraska, a lot of policies very similar to the state of Iowa's. And you can see they have only been over double digit in deaths. They've only actually reached 20 deaths a day in Nebraska one time in the history of this since we've been charting this pandemic. And then you look at Wisconsin, which had the first mass spreader event in the country when the court ordered them to have a primary election on April the 5th, I think it was. And 465,000 people came out and voted for that in person. And yet, despite the fact they had a court-ordered reopening that included the bars in the middle of May across the state, they have only been above 20 deaths one time ever since we started charting the pandemic in the state of Wisconsin. So you look at those numbers, Aaron, and what you see is whether they had a strict lockdown like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Illinois, whether they were uniquely hit hard like New Jersey was as part of the tri-state area, or whether or not we had minimal restrictions in comparison to others like Iowa and Nebraska. Pretty much every state in the Big Ten footprint has flattened the curve, and yet we're told it's not safe to play. Even though if you're in the Big 12 conference in Iowa, you can play. If you're in the ACC conference in Pennsylvania, you can play. If you're in Conference USA in Ohio, you can play.
The levels and the numbers and the mountains of lies and misinformation and disinformation, let's just be honest about that is out there right now that you have to cut through, or that we have had to cut through because of this, is just, it's just never ending. It's a never ending stream. And we go back to people like Mark Schlissel, the president of the University of Michigan, who he himself is an immunologist, right?
Yes. And he's the first physician to ever be the active president of the University of Michigan.
And somebody like that is not even going to take a second look, not even going to reconsider. Maybe listen to some other immunologists, some other epidemiologists as well, in reconsidering whether the tanking of this entire season and all the ancillary detriments that comes along with that, not even going to reconsider that. And this gets back a little bit to what we talked about last week as well, with just the attitudes of smug elitism and ivory tower syndrome. That's what we're up against at this point, because as we talked about a little bit, and as you've seen over the last week, as you've seen the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC continue to move on and plot ahead with their plans to play this fall, as you've seen that happen, the panic porn stars in the media have gotten a little bit more quiet and a newfound respect for taking into account other epidemiologists. Have you noticed this, Steve, over the last week? And so the pressure now, and this is where I know we're going to go next, the pressure now is back on the Big Ten. They thought that they could, I assume this is what this is. I assume that they thought that they could take some sort of create some sort of moral high ground here, but this completely boomeranged and has boomeranged upon them. And come this Friday, when the parents go supposedly to the Big Ten headquarters, and that visual, I think that's probably going to be pretty powerful. And unless they have some data that the rest of us haven't seen and that the doctors have not seen, the one that we mentioned at the top of the show have not seen, then they're going to have to make a decision and at the very least reconsider.
This is a conference who craves the moral high ground. Trust me, if they had some defined medical data that they could use to shame these other conferences for continuing on in order to elevate and confirm their moral superiority. Trust me, in our conference, we would have seen it by now. They don't have it. That's why they're quiet. That's why they're silent. And it's also now why they are facing a player family revolt. And you kind of teased this a moment ago. The trend began at the University of Iowa. But since then, we've now had it's up to a half dozen of our
Nebraska, Ohio State, Penn State.
And now Shaun Wade, you referenced this as well. Shaun Wade is the father, Shaun Wade's father. Shaun Wade is going to be a first-round draft pick in the NFL draft next year. He returned for his junior year at Ohio State. Could have gone pro last year as a redshirt sophomore and probably been drafted in the first 3 rounds. Chose to come back, improve his draft stock, and now there's no season. Well, his father is flying from Florida to show up unannounced at the Big Ten offices on Friday to get answers. And now we're hearing that there's going to be families from 5 other schools that are going to join him at the Big Ten offices on Friday. Those optics are absolutely terrible. And I know I've got people in the media that I respect are saying this isn't Kevin Warren's fault. If he thought it was bad, then obviously he'd pull his own son, but it's not his decision, it's the president's. Then you know what? I have no respect for Kevin Warren as a man then. If you're Kevin Warren and you're actively going out there, resign. I'd resign, especially because I'd just get another job the next day if my name was Kevin Warren. The idea that you're just going to keep your mouth shut for something you know is wrong because you have no choice. You always have a choice. If that's your excuse, then I'm not sure that's the most flattering portrait of our new commissioner at the exact same time. And so now you're facing an open player revolt, an open player family revolt. Yeah, Justin Fields on Good Morning America this morning. This has become maybe the worst public relations disaster for a conference I've ever seen. The only thing I can think of that comes close to it is when the Big 12 was working really hard to disintegrate a decade ago during realignment. But I don't think the stakes were as high for them as this is, because you're talking about a league that $50 million in television money per conference, the granddaddy of all conferences. 4 of the 6 winningest programs of all time are in this conference. And it just so happens to share a footprint with other conferences. Other conferences are playing in states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, and and Iowa. And so for those states to see, Iowa and Iowa State are separated by 100 miles. Iowa State's been in full padded camp for the last 3 days, because the Big 12 is opening their season earlier. And so their players are in full pads hitting each other right now. And so if you're in Iowa, you can follow Iowa State practicing in full pads, but it's not safe for Iowa to practice. This stuff doesn't make any sense. And when you do that to people, particularly when their livelihoods are at stake, you push them to do things like what's coming on Friday.
I don't really understand this because Kevin Warren comes from the front office of an NFL team, correct? Or
yes,
comes from the
Minnesota Vikings.
The Minnesota Vikings. That's what I thought, and I don't understand. If you're coming from that background, this entire pandemic or whatever you want to call it, the NFL has been steadfast, have they not? Their posture basically the whole time is, yes, this is a serious virus. We will do what we need to, but we're having a season. Figure it out. We're having a season. Figure it out. We're having a season. It's just a matter of how many fans we're going to have in the stands, but we're having a season. It keeps coming back to we're having a season. We're having a season. Okay, we'll cancel the entire preseason. We're having a season. Where's that mindset been at any level? Where have you seen that with Kevin Warren at all? Now, granted, he was working in the front office of a franchise, which is probably a little bit different than working in the front office of the league, I would imagine. But the league can't do things unless all of the franchises are on board, if I'm not mistaken. Where has that go get 'em attitude been with Kevin Warren at all? I don't understand that. And I get it's apples and oranges, college football and NFL because of the power structures. But still, where is any of that resolve? That's the point. And I don't see it, Steve.
I think you used a key word there, resolve. And I think what's angering people the most is the idea that maybe they just never intended to play. That you bait and switched us with your schedule announcement last week or 2 weeks ago and everything else. And that you were just trying to run out the clock, hoping that in your mind, the other conferences would come to their senses, bail too, so that you guys would all hang together rather than having to hang separately. And I think it's absolutely plausible that was this league's strategy the entire time. And then when it was clear that the other leagues were like, we said we're going to follow the data and science, so that's what we're going to actually do. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to talk to people that know the data and the scientists. I would assume Mark Schlissel is familiar with Vec Murthy. He's paying him. It's his employee, after all. He's the president of the university, and Vec Murthy is the cardiologist at the University of Michigan Hospital. I would assume they've met, maybe, or he's at least aware. I can find him in the faculty directory somewhere. Did he call him up and ask him what he thought? I would assume Rochester's not too far from, Minneapolis. I would assume somebody at the University of Minnesota has heard of the Mayo Clinic. Did they go to the Big Ten and say, hey, why don't we hear from the guys at the Mayo Clinic whether it's safe to play or not? The fact they didn't do these things, and then they aren't giving you some kind of, we all know the Pac-12 never wanted to play. I keep hearing, well, look how much better they didn't handle anything. There's no pressure on the Pac-12. Their players don't care about not playing. Their coaches aren't raising a stink about it. And frankly, they're in the most caring part of the country anyway that doesn't care about college football and takes pride in the fact that they're going to not play this fall because they're all in states that politically it's the popular thing to stay locked down forever while you're overrun by riots until a vaccine shows up. That's really popular in that part of the country. They're the caring states of America. So comparing this to the Pac-12, there's no political pressure on them at all. There would have been political pressure on the Pac-12 if they decided to play the other way around. This is different in this part of the country. And so the fact they haven't brought you any of those specifics, been transparent at all, it's not because they've got all kinds of really good information. They just haven't shown it to you. It's because they don't. And that's now why you've got the player families are going to the media and dragging this league's brand through the mud at the moment. And that brings us to the next topic to get to, spring football. Now you've got coaches kind of doing the passive-aggressive thing here with Ryan Day and Jeff Brom, but they're essentially calling the Big Ten's bluff on spring football. I mean, Jeff Brom at Purdue went back into his office and came out with like an 8-page manifesto of how to pull it off this spring and not have it impact the players' health and bodies for another season with a diminished schedule for next fall and on and on and on. Ryan Day, he hasn't been too passive-aggressive. He's been fairly perpetually disgusted, as a matter of fact. But I think these are coaches that know the Big Ten is not serious about this. And so they're getting out in front of the league again, because this isn't hardly a united front. And when you have bad leadership, you don't have a united front. You have divisiveness when you have bad leadership. You have unity when you have good unity. Does unity produce good leadership, or does good leadership produce unity? Good leadership produces unity, okay? People aren't going to unite behind a bad idea unless you put a gun to their heads. And so that's why there's not a gun to these teams' heads and coaches' heads. That's why there's so much disunity and discord. And I think you've got these coaches, Aaron, that are jumping the gun, knowing the Big Ten was not serious about this spring. And so they're calling their bluff by putting out their own overtures publicly to put pressure on the league.
Yeah, and good on them. Just good on them. I mean, there was enough detail in that schedule that I just flashed up from Jeff Brom to make it seem as if that this is tenable. Here's an idea. Why don't you get cracking, Big Ten? Just to call their bluff, because this is when it's when there's revolt or backlash to something. This is kind of when it gets refreshing, when the people on the side of sanity or on the side that you're polling for actually get ahead and think ahead a little bit, which is what this is. This is completely getting out ahead of the Big Ten, and they're putting out these overtures. And if the Big Ten is not coming back with anything specific, then we're going to, I think the next step, if they don't come out with something here in the next 3 or 4 days, say something at all to save face at least. But if they don't come out with some answers here the next 3-4 days, I could foresee this thing getting dialed up to 11, because as late in the game as it is, you've still got about, I would say, a 7 to 10 day window, Steve, to where you can still get something going by the end of September or early October.
You bet you could. I think it's even longer than that.
Yeah.
You've got you need at least 2 weeks of guides and pads to get ready for a season. But they've all been working out all summer long. They've all been up there since June. They're still working out now.
Yeah, if they're still practicing, then...
Yeah, then you just need a couple of weeks of padded camp to get guys ready to hit during a season. You can absolutely still play. You bet you could. Yes. And that brings us to the final thing we're going to talk about this week. I don't know, maybe it's a coincidence. I don't have carnal knowledge of the Ohio State recruiting class, other than it's really, really good. But on the same day that the Big Ten canceled the season, the Buckeyes lost the commitment of a 5-star defensive tackle. And if you're trying to recruit at the level Ohio State is to compete with Clemson and Alabama, that margin for error, man, isn't very large. I mean, 1 or 2 of those 5-star decommits or commits a cycle are the difference between you having the roster that those teams have. If you're Michigan and Penn State and you're trying to get to the level that Ohio State is at, same thing works for you. If you have just 1 or 2 of those guys a class, those kinds of difference makers that you don't land, that's the difference between you closing that gap between you and the Buckeyes or not. And so when you've got other conferences, they're going to be able to go to our players, our recruits, and say, hey, are you sure they're going to play in the spring? Hell, are they going to play next year? If we don't have a vaccine next year, they're going to play next year. Can Coach Harbaugh, can Coach Day, can Coach Franklin tell you right now that they're even playing football next year? Can they tell you that for sure? I think we are looking at getting negative recruited as a league in ways we've never, ever had to confront before.
Of course we are. And I saw a certain member of the Iowa media, Iowa Hawkeye media, tweet out the other day in relation to this story, I believe it was, something along the lines of, well, this coach needs to be called out by his peers, and this type of behavior must stop. This is the same type of panic porn star who has been pushing the narrative, the nothing, we can't do anything, lockdown for EVs or until there's a magical vaccine. This is the same type of guy who has been pushing the panic porn the entire time. There's no possible way we can play this, saying now, when confronted with a story already about negative recruiting, well, this needs to be confronted and put in it. What the hell did you think was going to happen, dude? What do you think was going to happen? Okay, you don't have to explicitly even say it like some of these coaches are probably doing already. You don't have to explicitly say it. It's right there in front of you. This conference or these conferences are not playing this year.
Yeah.
They don't have your future. They don't have you, really. They don't have your will in mind. The Big 12, look what our commissioner said last week. Ultimately, the athletes said and indicated that they wanted to play this year. So we're here for them. They're not here for us, which is the exact opposite message that the Big Ten has been sending the past week.
We'll come back, play our weekly game of Big Ten Would You Rather next.
Bigger 10 is brought to you by Michigan Podcast. If you like what you're hearing today and would like to support us, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast, where if you live somewhere where sports wagering is illegal, you can find Steve's picks for various games for just $5 a month. In the process, you can say thank you for creating this podcast on YouTube or via podcast, wherever you listen. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast.
Time again to play our weekly game of Big Ten Would You Rather here on Bigger 10. And Aaron, this first one is for you. Would you rather be Kevin Warren or Ellen DeGeneres right about now?
I'd rather be Ellen DeGeneres because at least she's still funny, which means she's got something going for her.
And people actually like her.
And people actually still like her.
She may have hired a staff of douchebags from what we're reading, but she still is pretty likable, right?
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, totally rather be Ellen DeGeneres. This one's for you. Would you rather be Justin Fields or Penny Sewell right now?
I would rather be Justin Fields right now. And the reason why is because I think you're helping your NFL draft stock in ways that you also saw Trevor Lawrence do when he took a leadership about players want to play. And if we do have college football this fall, it is possible Trevor Lawrence is the main reason why. He may have saved a season for at least a few of the conferences. Likewise, though, if that improves Trevor Lawrence's stock, stepping forward and showing that kind of leadership, I think Justin Fields is improving his stock where this is concerned as well. If you're Penny Sewell, you came back when you could have been a first-round draft pick last year, and now you have an entire season without any reps or anything whatsoever, and you're playing a position where, technique, particularly as it translates to the NFL, you're not just going to line up and maul guys in the NFL. And so I just think Justin Fields is helping his stock right now, for sure. All right, this next one is for you, Aaron. Would you rather hope there's some college football on TV this fall, or hope everyone cancels because otherwise the Big Ten could be really damaged moving forward? I think this is the poop sandwich that our conference has handed us as college football fans in the Big Ten. Because we all want to watch college football. We only get so many of these days a year. We wait all year for it, right? But you have to understand, if these other leagues do this and they're somewhat successful, like they get to play a conference championship game, for example. And sure, there'll be bumps in the roads, Aaron. There's going to be cancellations, delays, etc. But if they get to the end of the rainbow and award a conference championship this fall and play games on TV, while we're sitting out, hey, we're going to enjoy watching those games, right? But you have to understand that could be very detrimental to our league competitively and from a branding standpoint moving forward. So they've almost put us in a position as Big Ten fans to be rooting against our favorite sport.
Yeah, for me, it's the former. I'd rather hope that there's some college football on TV this fall, because I honestly just want some talionic justice here, some justice for what you did. I mean, they're screwing with these players' futures. They're screwing with all of the local economies that benefit and probably make a good chunk of their budget every single year from these various competitions coming through towns and staying in their hotels and eating at their restaurants. The Big Ten, it's not fair for all of these coaches. I mean, they get paid millions of dollars anyway, but it's not fair for all of the players that committed and put their blood, sweat, and tears in here as well. But goodness gracious, the Big Ten, as far as the leadership structure goes, anything to actually bring them some justice for this, I would be fine with that. I'd be fine with that. This last one is for you. Would you rather have the entire Big Ten compete this spring or have 6 teams compete in a home-and-home fashion this fall?
I'd rather have the 6 teams compete in a home-and-home fashion this fall. Yep. I'd rather do it this fall. I want to see, the other reason I want to see some teams play this fall is I want people to be shown that we can. This is a big step, like kids going back to school. It's a big step towards getting our lives back.
Yeah.
And people to be shown that, barring a meaningful vaccine, not like a flu shot, that may fail half the time, a meaningful smallpox, polio kind of a vaccine. Barring that, we're going to have to figure out, unless this thing just burns itself out in August like the first SARS did, we're going to have to figure out how to live with this. Okay? I mean, we have responsibilities, not just to ourselves and to our own countrymen, but to the world, man. I mean, how much is this country responsible for feeding and housing the entire planet? So I think this is a big step towards showing people that we can be responsible and smart, not hide or claim the virus is a hoax, but also not cower in perpetual fear because we were reminded there are forces at work in this world that are beyond us. We still have to live. And so I think having 6 Big Ten teams play home and homes this fall is another step towards that. And it comes without having the added concern of, if we play in the spring, does that mean then we have to diminish the following season too? And so now we have taken 2 fall seasons off the table from a legitimacy standpoint. If we have those teams play this fall, we don't have to worry about that.
Well said.
All right, we'll come back and finish up with our Twitter poll results and our question of the week next. This week's Twitter poll: what one word do you think best describes the Big Ten's decision to cancel fall football? We offered you prudent, gutless, politics, and liability. Politics was number 1 by 37.4%. Liability was second at 27.7%. Gutless, you can see that's the one I voted for, was at 25.7%. Less than 9, or just barely 9% of you thought the decision was prudent. Speaking of politics, and maybe it's a coincidence, man. It could be, Aaron, but every state with a Republican governor but one is playing high school football this fall. Just 7 of the 22 states that have Democratic governors are playing high school football this fall. Again, maybe that's a coincidence, man, but it's an awfully noticeable
coincidence. Just a coincidence.
Yes. All right. This week's question of the week comes from Unsportsmanlike Conduct. So player safety concerns are your issue, but then you're going to play with 2 schedules within 9 months, with eligibility awkwardness with early enrollees and wanting to be drafted, brought to you by the same guy in the same conference that pushed out a schedule knowing they had no intention, or he had no intention of ever using it. It feels like it is over.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the most damning talking point. That they just never were serious about this. They misled their own fans, and frankly, the student athletes by bringing them back in January to work out. You know why? Because the student athletes, Penn State had another report today, 0 positive tests. Penn State reported today in its football program. The student athletes did what they were asked to do. In fact, they're still doing it, Aaron. They're doing it right now. They did what, so you told them, hey, you have to give up basically the most fun part of being a college student in order to be a college football player this year if you really want to play. These athletes did this, except for a couple of cases like Rutgers, but it's friggin' Rutgers. We know they suck. Michigan State had an outbreak early on. Give them some slack with a new coaching staff. They just had their latest tests, and guess what it was? All negatives. All right? Coaching staff there kind of learned their lesson on the fly, the hard way, had to do a mass quarantine. They just retested everybody else in Michigan State, all negatives. So the student athletes did what you asked them to do. The programs did what you asked them to do. And then the reward they got was there's no reward for doing what you asked them to do. It kind of feels like you were lying to us all along. You're misleading us all along.
You just can't jerk people around like that and have them take you seriously.
I know.
Don't urinate down my back and tell me it's raining. I believe that's a variation of that phrase. That's what this is. I mean, if you're a Big Ten player or one of their family members, if you're somebody like the typical story at Iowa, you're a walk-on, but you got a spot on the team. You still got to pay your way through school, but you're on a freaking D1 Big Ten team. And hey, you've worked your way into special teams this year, and you're 1 or 2 snaps away from filling in at safety or filling in at linebacker, something like that. Where this could be, you know what, this is going to be something that only 1% of 1% of 1% you can say that they've actually done. And then you get jerked around like this all summer. And then you hear your commissioner, who 48 hours after he released the schedule for this upcoming season, say, I'd rather wait and play in spring, and then a few days later say, yeah, we're going to play in spring. If you really believe that you're going to play in spring, and you're a parent or that Big Ten player, I've got a virology lab in Wuhan to sell you, because it's just complete fecal matter.
We've been given and served up a lot of fecal matter here in the Big Ten over the last week or so, for sure. And I think people have grown tired of it and are now lashing back. We'll continue to follow this story right here on Bigger 10. You can follow us, by the way, at Bigger 10 on Twitter to keep up to date with what we think with all things going on with this and everything else as it relates to the Big Ten Conference. For Aaron McIntire, I'm Steve Deace. Thanks again for tuning in this week.